long time.
Yeah.
And then we just decided to squander it.
Oh,
hello.
how you going, everybody?
Hello, welcome to the Tiny Workshop. I'm John Madden.
Patrick Holcomb.
And here we are again. Hello, Haig, how are you? And he's spending your money. No, I'm just joking. Welcome back to the show. We're back here looking at your project. Where are you at with your chair?
This week will be the end of it. I've got a couple of steps to take you through, some tips, techniques, and some actual action. We're using some tools.
We had plenty of action last week as well.
Action-packed.
Yeah, okay. Action-packed. Dead silence. And so are we going to actually get a completed chair tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. I won't get onto the finishing, but I reckon I'll do that in my downtime and bring it back in a week or so.
Okay, now I can see you've got it tucked down there, ready for everyone to...
It's the suspenseful moment.
Yeah, excellent. And so I actually, in the advertising, and I think I promised, I sort of got ahead of myself, that I'd do some laminating later today, but we're actually going to change tact a bit and talk about building a workbench, which is going to be our next project that you and I are going to work on together.
That involves some laminating?
It
wasn't an outright lie?
Yeah, well, let's see, we'll need some help to get through that. So look, thanks for joining us. I'm going to hand over to Patrick now, and we will get on with another episode of the Tiny Workshop. Cheers.
All right, thanks, John. Give me my emery board back. Okay, folks. So, last time I was here with you, we went through some of the joinery that I did to join these 42 by 42 members together. I won't go over that too much. Suffice to say, I have joined all of those sticks together in the method that I showed you. The only thing that I'll mention that's worth noting is when you are clamping these things together, they're pretty unwieldy. Get yourself some spacer blocks that are the same width that you want your legs to remain, that stick in there, and then when you're applying that clamping pressure, you know that they're going to stay the right distance apart. And you want to check that it is square, move your clamps around to make sure that it is square, because if you clamp it up not square, that's the way it's going to stay. Okay, so those joins were tight. They should be fairly strong, but the joins in a chair need to be really strong because you're putting all of your weight on it. I'm going to slump down on this. I'll lean back on it at some point. I'll use it to climb up around my wood storage in my workshop. So I want to make sure those joints really hold together. And the way I've done that, and I will be demonstrating one of these joints, is I've put through dowels straight into that joint there. So it goes through the vertical member, into the horizontal member, and reinforces that joint. You can almost think of it like adding two giant screws in there, for instance. What the dowel does is it adds a whole bunch of tensile strength. So the dowel, when pulled along its length, it acts like a piece of steel or like a piece of cable, in that it's very, very difficult to stretch it. It will not budge, and it will just help reinforce that joint from any stretching. I like doing it after the joint has been glued together because it means the joinery created by the dowels is perfect. You drill a 12.5mm hole with your drill, and then you use a 12.5mm piece of dowel and hammer that in, and it's a seamless joint, and then you can sand it off and get it to look really nice and clean. So I'm going to go through that process with you guys now on the one remaining one that I haven't done. I'm just going to quickly clamp this down and then we'll talk about that process. Okay, that should stay put. If you're going to be sticking dowels into this joinery, it's important that your drill is going in dead straight. I'm not confident enough, or I'm not foolish enough to try and do that freehand. So I'm going to use a jig that I made. Now this is not very complicated. It's just two holes drilled next to each other that I will put onto my chair here to guide my drill in, and it will mean that the drill bit is in exactly the right position and the drill remains straight. Obviously, to do that, these holes need to be straight. The simplest way to do that is with the drill press, but as per the rules of this challenge, I didn't use a drill press to do this because it wasn't part of my toolkit. You need something else to guide your drill to make sure that those holes are straight. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but what I did was used a piece of wood that had edges that I could use as my guide. I clamped it in position. You can hold the drill bit, flush against those pieces of timber, and use those pieces of timber as your guide to drill really straight holes. So you're using a tool to make a jig to drill some joinery. But that's important that they're straight. I'm going to clamp that on there, and then we'll drill some holes. It's important that this is in the right position, and obviously you just need to mark that out to make sure that it is right where it needs to be. But it's really handy having one of these made up because it means that your dowels will look perfect between every single join. This isn't the kind of thing I love doing live because it's not the kind of thing that you want to rush, but I think it'll be okay. So that's in position, the chair's clamped down, I've got the depth marked on my drill bit so I know how far it's going to go. I'm going to drill that out now. You want to let that hole guide that drill bit. Okay, I should have been wearing eyeglasses. I feel like a fool. Don't comment about safety. No, do comment about safety. Safety's important. Now that we've got our holes and they're perfectly positioned and aligned, we want to put dowels in there. But one thing you will consider, oh, thanks John. John's giving me some eyeglasses. One thing that you will need to consider is that when you buy dowels from the hardware store, they're almost never exactly the right size. So this one here I measured up earlier. It's meant to be 12.5. It's actually 13.5 on one side, 12.5 on the other. It's an oval, which is no good for our purposes because we want it to be really nice and tight. I've got a really simple trick to show you. Put it into your drill. And I drilled a 12.5mm hole in a chunk of steel. Doesn't need to be this thick, but you can do this by hand as long as you've clamped it down. We're going to clamp this onto the bench here, and I'm going to force this dowel through that hole, and the hole will essentially ream that dowel to exactly the right diameter. You can actually do this with square stock, but it's a lot easier to do it with a dowel that's already roughly the right size. Excuse me while I taper the end slightly. Now we should be good. Okay, so that is exactly 12.5 now. I'm just going to really quickly sand that. And that just gets off any deep machine marks from the steel or any oil from the steel. Now this dowel is longer than I needed it to be, obviously, because I needed to clamp it into the drill, which crushes the end. I have a couple of these. I have the holes in my chair. Sorry, I just got to get this in the right position. And I'm going to put them into those holes. With some glue. It's important that you don't use too much glue in these holes because there's nowhere for it to go. If you have a whole chunk of glue in there, it's going to sit down there and then compress, and it'll be really hard, and sometimes it'll even force the dowel back out. So I would get a smaller piece of dowel, put some glue on it, put that in the hole.
I just noticed that you're using an inferior grade
You don't like my sauce bottle? I actually have one of these and love it, but this one was full of glue at home and this one wasn't because I use it all the time, so the sauce bottle was what ended up coming. But thanks for that, John. Bit of product placement. Like I said, make sure there's not too much glue in there. apply a sparing amount of glue to the dowel for exactly the same reason, just a thin layer. And as soon as you put that on, whack it into the hole, because if you let it sit in there for even a second with glue on there, it will grab and you will not be able to get it in. So you've got to go quickly. Be careful not to whack the piece of furniture that you're making. Okay, I'm going to do a quick cleanup and I'll return in a second after a quick break and go through the next steps with you guys.
Hi, I'm Jake. How do you know when your saw blades are blunt? So there's two ways that you can find out. The first is you can either look at the quality of the cut, and the second is you can look at the saw blade itself. So when you take a look at the cut, it's usually pretty obvious. You'll find check marks, burn marks, there'll be splitting on the underside. Whereas with the saw blade itself, it's a little more intricate. So I've got a brand spanking new Freud blade here. If you take a closer look, you'll notice obviously it is brand spanking new. It's also got quite shiny teeth. They're very sharp, so make sure you don't get your fingers too close. Whereas with a slightly used blade that we've taken off the drop saw here at TimberCon, you've got etch marks all over the blade. That just identifies, the material's been rubbing against it. But then when you look at the teeth, you'll find that you've got quite a bit of build-up here from friction causing the material to heat and stick to the blade. When it's getting very blunt, you'll notice that will start to char and go black. That's when it's time to switch out your blade and get it sharpened. And that's it. So thanks for watching.
Okay, welcome back everybody. I'm going to use this fancy little flush trim saw to trim these dowels off. For the smart person at home that says, but you said you wouldn't use a saw. Look, you can cut these to the right length and you can tap them just flush, or you can tap them just a tiny bit proud and then sand them off if you like. But I love this thing and they're not that expensive, so I don't count it as a major flaw in my limited tool selection for this project. It's very, very satisfying. They're very sharp, and it means that I've got almost no sanding to do afterwards. All right, a little bit of sandpaper. Because there's no glue left on the surface, in theory, you could oil that straight away. So that joint is reinforced. I've already done all the other three, so all four joins have dowel in them. Now, the next thing I want to quickly talk about is the way that these back battens work here. A chair ideally has an angle when you lean back against it. You don't want it to be 90 degrees. The way I achieved that was by setting this top batten further in with a deeper rebate than this bottom one. And that resulted in an angle of around 4 degrees, but they were still square edged. Now I tested that, it was comfortable enough. I actually wouldn't mind sitting on that, but I thought since most people have a hand plane, I wanted to do a little bit of shaping. So I see this as a bonus step. It's not really involved in the structure of the chair. It's not 100% necessary, but I thought everyone would appreciate it because people love hand planes. What I wanted to do was make sure that the angle between this first batten and the second batten was one continuous line. So I put a ruler from the high point to the high point, and I've drawn that line on the end grain of the timber on both ends, and then followed the line all the way around. And what that allows me to do is use those lines as a guide to match that angle. So I'm just going to do a bunch of passes here. Maybe John can keep you company for a second.
Me?
Yeah, some banter.
What shall I do to assist you with this? Look at this. You're a bloody woodworker after all.
Look at those ribbons.
I love the sound of hand planes, you know. I once made a round, like a barrel with a whole bunch of out of US soap and hand played all the angles. And I remember I'd got a Veritas number 7, and I spent like a whole month hand plating this barrel together. And you get into the sound of it, and people start there in there hand plating, and they get carried away. And oh wow, I went too far. But anyway, so that's my story about that.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. So what this has done is it means that those two planes are essentially, well, it forms that perfect 4-degree angle that I was looking for. To make sure those edges aren't super sharp, I've got a little tip here. Get yourself some 180 sandpaper or whatever you'd like to use.
I think that's my fingernail.
Oh, well, it's mine now. And I've double-sided that tape to this really thin chunk of timber. The reason I like doing this is it provides me with a really, it's a solid surface, but it's a lot easier to use than a big chunky block of wood with sandpaper wrapped around it. And it allows you to get right into the corners to provide a really consistent chamfer. You kind of use it like a file. So I want to do these edges. That looks pretty consistent. Do these ends. And I'll just do this top joint here as well. And this just makes the project look finished. It's a lot nicer to touch because those edges aren't sharp. It means the edges are less likely to be damaged because they're not as fine. Just overall helps the project a lot. So, the last step that we need to talk about is the seat. This is my seat. As per the rules of this game, I only used hardware timber. So the timber sizes that I was able to get was 180 by 19. So I used 2 pieces of that and then 2 pieces of 42. So I actually built the size of this chair around those widths so that I wouldn't have to rip anything because I wasn't allowed to. It's important when you're placing a big wide piece of timber across some joinery like this that you allow this wide piece of timber to expand and contract however it likes with humidity and temperature, mainly moisture. And so what you've got to keep in mind is that if you put a screw here and here, as this board contracted, it would probably split. Also, if you didn't leave room for that expansion, as this board expanded, if it got a little bit damp, it would break this joinery apart, and it happens all the time. It's happened in pieces that I've built a long time ago, and I see it often in cheaply made furniture, or perhaps made by people who weren't really aware of that. So what you want to do, make sure there's space for this to not wiggle around, but expand. And then you want to only attach it either with hardware that can move or with only a central screw. So this board had a natural cup in it, which I used to my advantage to be able to put a single screw on this side and this side, which will allow that expansion and contraction to happen naturally. And I've lost some screws. But that's pretty much the extent of this chair project. So I might welcome, actually, I think we're going to go to a quick break, or did you want to come back on?
Yeah, you made a bit of a mess. No wonder you lost the screws. What we're going to do here, I think we're going to cut to a short break, but it's featuring me, of all people, and then we're going to come back and we're going to have a chat about the next segment. Joe?
Fantastic, sounds good.
Hello there, welcome to this Tiny Workshop, Tiny Tips segment. My name's John Madden. Now last week, if you were watching the program, you would have seen me doing a reasonably decent job of marking out a lap joint and cutting it out there on camera. So I just wanted to revisit the old marking square. Now if you're like me, you don't know where some of your tools came from, and this is a perfect example. This appeared in my life at some point about 20 years ago. I may have bought it at the markets up on the north coast, or I'm not 100% sure, but I've used this square through most of my woodworking career, so to speak. Now, a lot of older squares like this aren't always perfectly square. You can buy a whole bunch of brand new types of squares. Some of them can be very expensive, to say the least. Like, we're not all making cabinetry for NASA here, you know what I mean? So you don't really need to go out and buy yourself a $200 square in order to get good results. You just need to get a square that will serve the purpose, as satisfactory to the expectations that you want. What I like about this square was that I think I paid, from memory, $5 for it. Secondly, it's got a really nice wide blade on it. So when I'm marking out stuff, I've got plenty of surface area to press down on the timber that I'm marking out, and it won't, it's very sturdy, it's steady on the job. A criticism of some of these older tools, though, is that they can be out of square. So I want to show you a quick tip on how to make sure your square is square. So get your square and a pencil, preferably a knife, but in this, for the purposes of the video, we'll use a pencil. And you lay it down here along a straight edge and mark a line. You see that line right there? And then what you do is you come from the opposite side and push your square up to that line that you marked. Now for me, that looks pretty square. I could send this off to Sydney to get precision tested by, I don't know, a NASA employee or something, but if you're in the workshop, draw a line, push it up there. If it's a little bit out, you can just simply tap the square and adjust it till that line is perfectly parallel. I hope you've enjoyed this tiny workshop, tiny tip segment. See you again soon.
Right.
Well, it actually looks like a chair, so that's worked out. I wouldn't want to ride all the way to Europe on it, though.
I think you'd get a little sore.
Yeah, your back would go. But,
yeah, look, I reckon it'll be the chair that I use in the workshop. So it's going to get bashed around, but it's light, it's very strong, and it's utilitarian. But ultimately, I'm pretty chuffed, pretty pleased with it, considering it was made with hardware pine and mitre saw.
Online in 3 sessions.
That's right.
Bit of pressure.
John Monochef, I think is how you pronounce it, online, just asked if I'm going to finish it. What I'm thinking with this is I was going to do maybe a white, like a light white stain, like spruce. Livos have a white product, and so does Timber? No. Evolution. Have a spruce colour, which is like a light white stain. Yeah. It'll keep this looking really clean and bright. And so I would recommend putting something on it because it'll just get so stained otherwise.
And the nice thing about Livos products in particular, and the Whittle Wax products as well, is that they're really user-friendly. You don't need any special protection. You can wash your hands in soapy water and clean up if you get it on your skin.
Oh, fantastic.
And they're straight out of the can, very easy to use. So check that out at the TimberCon website. Okay, let's talk a little bit about our next project. Congratulations!
Thank you.
You actually made something that was pretty stressful, really.
Yeah.
What we're going to do next is talk about workbenches. Workbenches are more than just a bench. It's actually the core of any workshop, and it actually goes past being just a surface to construct stuff on. It's actually a tool in itself. This bench here that we can see in the set, I don't know if we can get a decent shot of it, is actually my own bench that I made 25 years ago out of some I was driving through Newtown, I think in Sydney, and this Oregon was in a skip on the side of the road because I'm pulling a lot of old warehouses down at the time, and I pinched this out of the skip. I had no money, still don't have any money really, but and I built this bench. And over the years, it's been like a best friend for me. I've spent thousands of hours standing, and it's had a few modifications over the years, but we won't go into that.
It's got a lot of character.
Oh, now it's like in a semi-retirement phase now. It's taken up a media career. So, but you know, it's still very sturdy. What about your own bench?
Initially in my home workshop, I did build a hardwood traditional workbench, but I found that when I moved into my factory, what I really wanted was a lot more space. So I built an assembly table out of some, essentially some pallet racking as the legs, which were really solid, and then a huge chipboard, like 19mm yellow tongue top, which I then put MDF on top, which I can change out so that it stays really nice and clean.
Very practical.
Yeah, look, it is not your beautiful craftsman bench, but it's about 1.2 by 3 meters long, and I can build whole cabinets on it.
Well, talking about craftsman's bench, I bought in the workshop Bible here, the Workbench book. This is an American publication, and if you go through this book, you see some of these very beautiful sort of shaker furniture inspired benches. And you see these, look at this one, this is just gorgeous. It's about, I don't know, a kilometre long. What was that in miles?
Looks like it's made out of slate.
Yeah, yeah. But I guess the point of this conversation is that if you're new to woodworking, there's a lot of pressure on you about your bench, because a lot of people come into woodworking and say, well, I've got to build a bench. It's like a rite of passage. And if you don't have a lot of experience woodworking, building your first bench can be an extremely challenging process, and I think it actually can put a lot of people off.
Yeah, absolutely, and there are a lot of different opinions about it. People's opinions are very strong. The type of vise, the shape, the size, how you construct it. Yeah,
I need
the right
$4
timber.
grand's worth of US oak to build my bench.
That's
you know?
right.
And it's, which is, rubbish in my opinion. I think a lot of people who are getting into woodwork for the first time can just go and buy a bench. There's plenty of people who make them.
Yeah.
But what we thought we would do is actually build a bench that's practical, that's compact, easy to make, out of hardware shop bought timber. And we're going to do that on the show.
So it's kind of almost following similar rules to the chair in a way. We want to show that you can build something super functional and strong using commonly available timber, and we'll be using the same techniques as well for that joinery.
We're going to keep it really tiny and really simple. So come back next week and we're going to kick it off with probably a bit of a design. We'll have some plans available that if anyone out there wants to build a bench. And Patrick and I are going to do this project together, which should be interesting.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
And we might have a special guest by next week. We'll see. We've got to coach him out of his little possum hole to come on the show. But anyway, we'll worry about then. So thanks for joining us. My name's John Madden.
Patrick Holcomb.
We'll see you next week on the Tiny Workshop.